they would end up with someone louder, someone more beautiful, more patient, more desirable, more emotionally advanced, someone who knew exactly how to handle them, someone who cracked the code you couldn't crack. And maybe that thought has been haunting you in the quiet. Maybe it slips into your chest at night when the room goes still and your mind starts replaying the distance, the mixed signals, the warmth that vanished without warning. Maybe part of you still wonders if they gave someone else the version of them you begged for. The softness, the clarity, the consistency, the love without the disappearing act. That is the wound, isn't it? Not just that they pulled away, but that they might become for someone else what they refused to become for you. And that thought can destroy a person slowly, because it makes you question everything. Your worth, your timing, your body, your voice, your needs. It makes you wonder if you were too much, too emotional, too honest, too available. It makes you stare at your own love like it was a mistake. But here is the brutal truth. Avoidants do not usually end up with the person who loves the deepest. They end up with the person who feels the least dangerous to their nervous system. Let that sink in, because that changes everything. It was never just about chemistry, never just about attraction, never just about who was prettier, kinder, smarter, or more compatible. It was about what happened inside their body when intimacy became real. It was about the pressure that rose in their chest when they felt expected, seen, needed, or emotionally responsible. It was about the invisible alarm system inside them that mistakes closeness for loss of control. So when you loved them openly, when you asked for reassurance, when you reached for depth, when you wanted the bond to become something solid, something named, something mutual, you may have thought you were moving closer. But inside them, another process was happening. Their amygdala, that ancient alarm center in the brain, was not always reading your love as safety. Sometimes it was reading it as threat. Not because you were threatening, but because closeness activated old associations. Pressure, engulfment, expectations, failure, exposure. The nervous system does not care what is logical. It cares what feels familiar. So even when part of them wanted you, another part started flooding with cortisol, with restlessness, with the desperate need to get space before they drowned in feelings they could not regulate. And this is where so many people misunderstand avoidance. They say, if they cared, they would stay, but that is not how this pattern works. Often, they leave because they care, and the caring overwhelms them. They go cold because they feel too much, not nothing. They detach because attachment is activating. They pull back because your importance starts to scare them. That doesn't excuse what they do. It doesn't make inconsistency romantic. It doesn't turn emotional unavailability into depth. Pain is still pain. Harm is still harm. But if you keep telling yourself they detached because you were not enough, you will build an identity around a lie. The truth is harsher, but cleaner. You were not too much. You were too real for someone who survives by reducing intensity. And the person avoidants often end up with is not the fantasy person you imagine. Not the perfect soulmate. Not the emotionally superior replacement. Usually they end up with someone who does one thing very well. They do not force emotional confrontation. That's it. Sometimes that person is naturally independent. Sometimes emotionally flat. Sometimes avoidant too. Sometimes distracted, busy, unavailable in their own way. Sometimes they are warm, but they don't ask for depth too early. They don't press, they don't pursue. They don't demand language for what is happening. They leave a lot unsaid. They create space without meaning to. And to an avoidant nervous system, Space can feel like relief. Relief can feel like compatibility. Compatibility can look like love. But be careful. Relief is not always intimacy. Sometimes it is just the absence of activation. That is why the people avoidants stay with can seem so confusing from the outside. You look at them and think, why them? You compare, analyze, obsess. Maybe they are less emotionally intelligent than you. Maybe they give less. Maybe they don't even understand the avoidant deeply. But they don't trigger the same alarm. They don't reach into the wound with the same intensity. They don't make intimacy impossible by asking for it to be named. And that can keep the system calm enough for the relationship to continue. Not because it is deeper, because it is easier to tolerate. This is the part nobody tells you when your heart is broken. Sometimes the relationship that lasts is not the most loving one. It is the one with the least emotional friction. It is the one that lets the avoidant stay defended without being challenged every day by the mirror of real closeness. Because real closeness exposes. It asks them to be consistent when they are used to self-protection, to stay present when they want to shut down, to reveal fear instead of converting it into distance, to tolerate being needed without feeling trapped, to receive love without scanning for the exit. That is advanced work for a person with avoidant attachment, and most people do not do advanced work just because someone loves them enough. Love does not automatically heal dysregulation. Desire does not automatically create capacity. Chemistry does not override conditioning. This is why you can feel their eyes on you, feel their longing, feel the tenderness under the surface, and still watch them disappear. Because the dopamine of pursuit and the reality of intimacy are not the same thing. Dopamine loves anticipation, mystery almost. It spikes in distance. It feeds on what is not fully possessed. But real connection requires regulation. It requires staying in the room after the high fades. It requires tolerating ordinary closeness, not just craving dramatic absence. And many avoidants are brilliant at wanting what feels far away. They struggle more with holding what feels emotionally near. You probably saw it happen. When things were uncertain, they leaned in. When you pulled back, they noticed. When you seemed less available, they became curious, attentive, alive. But the moment you softened, the moment you let them feel chosen, the moment the bond asked for embodiment instead of fantasy, something shifted. A wall, a delay, a strange silence. Not always because they stopped caring. Sometimes because now it was real enough to threaten the architecture of their defenses. Imagine them alone after a deep moment with you. The conversation was intimate. You were honest. Maybe you looked at them in that unbearable way that says, I see you. Maybe your voice got softer. Maybe your presence felt safe enough that they started opening, and for 1 second, they forgot to protect themselves. Then they go home. The room gets quiet. Their chest tightens. Their mind starts searching for flaws. Maybe this is moving too fast. Maybe you expect too much. Maybe they're losing themselves. Maybe something feels off. Maybe they need space. Maybe they were more invested than they meant to be. This is how deactivation begins. Not always with logic, with body memory, with a nervous system trying to restore distance before vulnerability becomes dependence. So no, they did not always leave because you were hard to love. Sometimes they left because you reached a part of them they work very hard not to feel. And the core concept you need to understand is this: emotional spaciousness. Not silence as punishment, not detachment as performance, not pretending not to care. Emotional spaciousness. That is what avoidance can breathe inside. A connection that does not corner them. A presence that does not grip. A love that is not constantly trying to extract reassurance. A dynamic where they can approach without feeling consumed. This is why chasing them backfires so brutally. Because every extra message, every demand for clarity, every attempt to force resolution in the middle of their shutdown only confirms the nervous system story that closeness equals pressure. You think you are fighting for the connection. Their body thinks it is escaping captivity. And the more you chase, the more you unknowingly hand them the role of emotional authority. You become the one waiting, checking, interpreting crumbs, making meaning out of delay. You become hyper-attuned to every shift in tone, every half-reply, every hour of silence. Your dopamine gets hijacked too. Your nervous system begins living in anticipation. You call it love because it feels intense, but often it is your body trapped in intermittent reinforcement, starving for relief. That is not devotion. That is a biochemical hostage situation. And here is where the power starts to change. The moment you stop trying to force an avoidant to prove your worth, the entire dynamic reorganizes. Because now, the space they once used to regulate no longer comes with guaranteed access to you. Now, your silence is not pleading, it is self-possession. Now, your distance is not a strategy, it is truth. Now, your non-reactivity is not coldness, it is nervous system mastery. And this is the part people rarely understand until they live it. Avoidants often begin to feel the loss after the pressure is gone, not during the chase. After. After the texts stop bending toward them, after your energy withdraws, after the emotional field quiets. After they realize you are no longer standing at the door of their confusion, asking to be chosen. Because when the pressure disappears, something else appears in its place. Absence. And absence speaks differently to an avoidant psyche. It removes the immediate threat and leaves them alone with what was actually there. The warmth, the attunement, the person who understood them in ways they never admitted, the person whose love had texture, the one whose presence softened them, scared them, and made them feel more than they knew how to manage. That is when the missing begins. Quietly at first, a thought while driving, your name crossing their mind in the grocery store, an old message, a memory of your face when you were trying not to cry. The way you understood the silence before it even had language. The way you loved them without demanding performance. And because the threat is gone, the attachment can rise again. This is why some avoidants circle back, not because they had a personality transplant, because distance gave them access to feelings that closeness overwhelmed. But this is also where so many people sabotage their own healing. The avoidant returns. A message, a like, a breadcrumb, a late-night confession, a subtle reopening. And suddenly your whole body lights up. Dopamine floods the system. Hope starts narrating the future before reality has changed. Be careful here. Attention is not transformation. Missing you is not the same as being able to love you well. Feeling regret is not the same as building capacity. Wanting access to your warmth is not the same as being ready for intimacy. This is the warning. If you break your pattern just long enough for them to feel your absence, but not long enough to change your standards, you will recreate the same wound in a different outfit. Because unhealed avoidants do not need much to slip back into old defenses. The moment closeness returns, the old alarm can return with it. The same deactivation, the same withdrawal, the same confusion. The same story where you become the emotional caretaker and they become the mystery you are trying to solve. Do not call that fate. Call it pattern recognition. And patterns do not break because someone misses you. They break because someone takes responsibility for what intimacy activates inside them. So if you ever meet them again from a new place, do not just listen to their words. Watch their capacity. Can they stay? Can they name discomfort without fleeing? Can they handle your needs without turning them into accusations? Can they remain connected when the bond is no longer fantasy, but reality? Can they tolerate closeness without punishing you for the vulnerability it awakens in them? That is the test. Not whether they return, whether they can remain. Because anyone can miss you in the distance. Very few can love you in the depth. And now we arrive at the part that changes your life if you let it. Who avoidants actually end up with is not the real question. The real question is why you thought being left by someone dysregulated was evidence against your value. Why you stood in front of someone else's fear and translated it into your own inadequacy. Why you kept trying to become easier to digest so you could be chosen by a nervous system trained to retreat from nourishment. There is nothing wrong with wanting love. There is nothing shameful about longing, about tenderness, about depth. The wound begins when you start bargaining with those qualities, trimming them down, silencing them, making yourself less expressive, less honest, less alive, just to avoid triggering someone who has not learned how to stay. That is where self-abandonment enters, quietly, reasonably, disguised as patience. But your healing begins when you realize this simple thing. The right person for you is not the person you have to emotionally underfeed to keep close. Read that again in your body. You are not here to become smaller so someone else can avoid feeling overwhelmed. You are not here to earn consistency by suppressing your humanity. You are not here to confuse emotional unavailability with depth just because it activates your hunger. Your power is not in making an avoidant chase you. Your power is in no longer needing to be chased to feel worthy. That is the identity shift. When you stop measuring your value by who could not hold you, something inside you unclenches. The obsession weakens. The fantasy loses color. You stop asking, "Why wasn't I enough?" and start asking, "Why did I keep offering gold to someone who only knew how to hold air?" And then something beautiful happens. You become spacious too. Not detached, not numb, not armored. Spacious. You stop gripping for outcomes. You stop collapsing in the face of silence. You stop auditioning for love through over-explaining, over-giving, over-waiting. Your nervous system learns a new truth, that uncertainty is not a command to abandon yourself, that someone else's withdrawal does not define your desirability, that being deeply feeling is not weakness. It is information. It is aliveness. It is power when paired with discernment. And from that place, everything changes. You no longer crave the emotionally unavailable with the same desperation, because your body is no longer confusing inconsistency with value. You start noticing what peace feels like, what mutuality feels like, what it feels like when someone does not just want your softness, but knows how to protect it. That is the kind of love that rebuilds a person, not the kind that keeps them guessing. So if you are still grieving the avoidant who pulled away, hear this carefully. They may think of you for a very long time. They may compare people to the way you made them feel. They may remember the safety, the intensity, the tenderness, the mirror you held up without trying. They may even come back. But none of that is the point anymore. Because your life cannot stay parked outside someone else's emotional capacity. Your life has to become your own. And when it does, when you finally understand that someone else's avoidance was never a verdict on your worth, you stop mourning only the person. You start releasing the role you played. The pursuer, the fixer, the one who kept bleeding meaning into silence. That version of you gets to rest now. You do not need to decode distance to deserve love. You do not need to be chosen by confusion to be unforgettable. You do not need to win the heart of someone frightened by intimacy to prove that your heart is extraordinary. It already is. And the moment you know that, not perform it, not repeat it, but know it, your whole presence changes. Your voice changes. Your choices change. Your standards become holy. Your energy stops begging and starts discerning. You no longer ask who avoidants end up with. You ask who gets access to you now. That is where the power was